The Pennsylvania Project and the Public Banking Institute present Public Banks for Public Works, Banking on the Commonwealth. This program was presented on October 18, 2014 at the Quaker Friends Center in Philadelphia, PA, as part of the East Coast National Symposium on Public Banks. This series of presentations covers several fundamentals of public banking, as well as related issues, factors, and opportunities. In this video, PBI Executive Director Gwen Hallsmith discusses widening the circle, approaching stakeholders and elected officials. The session is introduced by PBI and Pennsylvania Board Director Walt McCree.
We've got to this point of the day where we've gone through a number of steps. We've looked at the opportunity and the need, some of the challenges, some of the resources, some of the requirements. And in that last session, there were a lot of questions about how are we able to make this story get out there? How do we make this, and how do we make an effective strategy to have public banking be understood and, more importantly, adopted, implemented, and known? And there are a couple of factors there that around the country, we've gathered a lot of really good experience in the last couple of years in the process of doing this. By meeting with stakeholders and policy holders and with bankers and with politicians, with elected officials, with people who have to ultimately carry the ball and or who have a stake in the game. So on a national level, the Public Banking Institute has been leading this creative evolutionary effort. And I'm going to let Gwen Hallsmith, our executive director, we're so fortunate to have Gwen running our show these days. She's a globally experienced commentator, writer, theorist, but also a municipal servant herself, someone who ran a city, who knows municipal law, who knows the dynamics inside that industry, somebody who's paid some price, personal price in that. That's a good story. I don't know if you want to tell it or not, but let me just say that she lost her job to a mayor who didn't like to talk about public banking because he's a lobbyist for Bank of America. This was actually literally happened. So she's been in the trenches. She's got some blood on her shirts and stuff. But she's a good heart and a good spirit. And also, by the way, the architect, I think that's fair, of the Vermont Public Bank Uprising, which has really swept that state. And I'll let you take it from there. Gwen Hallsmith.
Thank you, Walt. Right. Yeah, this time last year, I was the Director of Planning and Community Development for the City of Montpelier, actually. And that is my background. I've worked in and with cities for over 25 years on sustainability issues. And as a result, this question of how you mobilize stakeholders and engage public officials in something like a public bank that we believe will make our cities more sustainable is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So I just thought it was a great way to wrap up today. But first of all, I'd like to congratulate all of you. If you are still here at 5 o'clock on Saturday, you are now officially money wonks. You really are. And to look out in the audience and see the likes of Paul Glover, who is like the father of local monetary wonks, there is some truth to this, but it also means that you are unique. You know some stuff that probably 1 in 100,000 people around you know about how the monetary system and how the banking system is really at the heart of the failed economy we have, and how it can be at the heart of a successful, sustainable economy. But that message is not going to resonate on Main Street yet. Trust me on this. I've made many talks and seen many blank faces when I start talking about money and its role in our lives. First of all, people hate to talk about money. They hate money. They don't like banks any better. It's often a source of real grief and pain, and And so when you start there, you're not actually starting where people are. And that's a really important way to enlist people in the efforts that you're going to make, is to start where they are. So let's move on with this very short talk about how you engage and empower the people that you're going to be working with on public banking. Because I trust that if you've sat here all day, you're going to go back to wherever you are and you're going to try to get something started. And it is certainly within every one of your power and capability to do that. In fact, I wrote a guidebook for people that want to do sustainability planning in their community. You don't actually have to be the community planner. You don't have to be the mayor. You don't have to be a city councilor. You can be a citizen of any city and start something that will eventually change that city. It's absolutely possible. You just need to follow some very basic guidelines and steps for how to do it. And two of the most important words I can teach you are engagement and empowerment. Because you're not there to superimpose your ideas on everybody else, even though you have some good ones. But I really love what Rob said about bottom-up approaches and how public banking reflects that, and how if we manage to get public banking working, a lot of other bottom-up approaches are going to work as well. But one of the hardest things about bottom-up approaches, especially if you know you already have the right idea, is engaging other people in that right idea and listening to them and getting them empowered to take the kind of action that needs to be taken. So this involves both getting leadership on board, recruiting a core team, recruiting stakeholders, holding a lot of events and publicity to get some real momentum going. But it also involves some skill building on your part about how to speak to other people's self-interest, training stakeholders to do the things in ways that don't crash and burn as a group, and getting real participation, communication, and inclusion moving along. And I can't emphasize how hard this is all to do. We talk about multi-stakeholder processes as if they're easy, when in fact, they're the hardest thing to do. To get a whole wide span group of people together and come up with a solution or a program or a strategy that everybody agrees on and everybody agrees how to move things forward. Here in the Public Banking Institute, even recently, in an unnamed county, in an unnamed state, we had a public banking group melt down because they really didn't have norms and paths to follow to resolve conflict in their group, and they had some real differences of opinion even about how to pursue a public bank in their jurisdiction. So, with that in mind, keep in mind it is difficult, but also you need to speak to people's self-interest. And even though money is in everybody's self-interest, you don't want to talk about money, and you don't want to talk about banking. Not as the first step. You now all, remember, are money wonks. You understand a lot of things that other people don't understand. Public banking is not the goal. Public banking is a means to get to the goals that we all share as a human family, including educating our children, including living high-quality lives and good housing, including having jobs that pay a living wage and have meaning for us rather than being meaningless slave labor type work. Having low taxes so that we have more money to enjoy. Having a level of equity so we don't have this horrific inequality that we're all suffering from now. And having good government. All of these are actually the goals of public banking. And these are the types of self-interest that you will speak to when you're speaking to both the stakeholders you want to get involved and the public officials you want to get involved. Because they share these goals, even if they don't understand money, banking, and why public banking is a good thing. So leadership. Leadership is actually a critical ingredient. Often you won't be able to get the leaders involved until you've already built the parade in front of them. Okay? They love to get in front of parades, leaders, but occasionally, and we're fortunate in Vermont to have some some really good leaders. Anthony Polina, there on your right, is one of them. He's a senator in our state house, and he has been a very outspoken and effective advocate for public banks in Vermont. Now, did he start this on his own? No. He started it because I convened a large group of stakeholders that included business leaders like Jeffrey Hollander. Maybe some of you have heard of him. He ran Seventh Generation. Some of our other senators and representatives, members of the Occupy group, members of groups that wanted to see the national monetary system change with the NEED Act, etc. Lots of different people. And we started moving on legislation that he favored. But once we had the parade started, he got in front of it and has been very successful. Claudette Sortino, which is the woman in the picture, she's with the League of Women Voters, and she's running for the legislature now on a public banking platform. I predict that she will be one of our main champions in the next legislative session because she convened the entire League of Women Voters in Vermont into talking and studying about public banking, and then she convened this wonderful session with the state treasurer and Anthony and me and the banking lobbyist in the state house. It's all online, you can watch it, and that helped move the debate along. So leadership is important, but it's often not the first thing. It's going to be the second thing once you build the parade. Now, building the parade is a challenge because, again, you have to get a lot of different sorts of people involved for this to succeed. It can't just be other money wonks. Trust me on this. You've got to get a whole lot of different kinds of people involved. So I advise people to pull together a core team that represents a number of different interest groups who will benefit from public banking. These groups are who you need to have in your shop to move forward. So some of the team members are on the left at one of the meetings we had at the State House. Look, I'm still wearing his coat. And on the right was, on the other side is a core team I pulled together in the city of Newburgh, New York, to do a sustainable master plan. That city had been torn apart by racism and inequity and real strife for a long time. But we used this thing that I ended up calling the concentric circle means of recruiting stakeholders, where each of the core team members went out and invited a bunch of people they knew to a training session we were going to have for stakeholders. A 2-day-long affair where we taught them a lot. And then at that session, which had 50 people each, we asked who isn't at the table, who needs to be here, of all of those participants. And they then recruited the next 50 people that needed to be involved, and on and on. So we ended up doing 5 training sessions, trained over 300 people that were all leaders in their own right in the community. And we trained them in things like conflict resolution and facilitating meetings and how to be a good meeting participant. Basic group process skills that you absolutely need to move forward with this type of initiative. So, stakeholders. Stakeholders are people who have an interest in what you're doing. That'll include housing advocates, students. Who else? Who else are stakeholders? Small businesses. Exactly. Who else?
Community bankers.
Community bankers. Right. Who else?
Job advocates.
Job advocates. Unions. Right. Who else? There's lots of potential. Homeowners. People who have had trouble paying their mortgages. Right? So getting all of those people at the table and starting to recruit them, you need to have people that speak to them, not you necessarily, if you're not one of that group. But recruiting them and getting them to come to some type of training at the outset can make the difference between a successful initiative to start a public bank or any type of community process in your area and an unsuccessful one. As I said, leadership skills, teamwork, facilitation skills, conflict management, how to get innovation to diffuse through a community. There's a lot written on innovation diffusion theory. I have some handy games I get people to play to understand how new ideas percolate through a community, and also how to structure public participation so that people genuinely feel engaged and empowered. People don't work for something they don't own. Ownership is absolutely key to making this happen. And how do people feel like they own an initiative? They have a voice in it. That means when they say, gee, I think a public bank would be better serving students in our community, because we have a lot of students that are really struggling with student debt. Even if you started with the idea that this was all about business, maybe you open your mind to the fact that students might actually be a really good constituency for what you're doing. Because your idea isn't the best idea. Your idea is just one of a whole variety of ideas. And if you've ever read the book, The Wisdom of the Crowd, the more people you successfully engage in thinking about something, the better your efforts will be. If you haven't learned this yourselves, take it from me. I've made lots of mistakes in my day because I didn't listen to that kind of flaky person that showed up at a meeting and, oh my God, I don't really know them very well. And yet their idea was really important to hear, to listen to respect, and to run forward with if you wanted it to succeed. So these are some pictures from stakeholder trainings that have happened in the past. They can be really fun. I have some games, and I'm happy to share all of this with you if you want to do the training yourself. Games to teach people teamwork, teach people how not to compete with each other, teach people how to resolve conflict and listen very carefully to each other if they're in conflict so that they understand what's being said and don't just react and escalate the conflict unnecessarily. Then, once you've got a nice, solid, well-trained stakeholder group, you've got to reach out even further into the community and get real feedback on real questions that you want to have answered. So one of the things we hit on in the last session that needed to be decided, actually, before you could say much about what the public bank would do for your community, is what is its purpose going to be? You could actually do a community survey on that question to find out what the broad variety of people think public banking should do. And you wouldn't, again, necessarily start with questions about either money or banking, but you could find out what unmet needs are for money. What's the money missing for in your life? If you had an opportunity to have more money in your life, either through a loan or a grant, what is it that you could do that you can't do now? I think people would love to answer that question. It's a little bit like the fairy godmother kind of visit, right? You also need to make sure that you reach everybody, that you don't stick to just the usual suspects of other money wonks like you. You've got to look at who in your community is typically excluded from these decisions. You know, youth, the elderly, the differently abled, the minorities, women, all of these people don't tend to get involved. And how do you get people involved that don't tend to get involved, that don't come to a meeting at a friend center on a Saturday and sit here for 8 hours listening to people talk? That's a pretty rare group. How would you reach them?
Go to them.
Go to them. Exactly right. Don't expect them to come to you. Go to them. Seniors have senior meal sites. Youth are in schools. Pretty captive audience there. There's lots of places that these people go anyway. Churches on Sunday. Sporting events. We would show up when we were doing the big plan in Montclair, we'd show up at the Mountaineers game with big signs that would show people something about whatever issue we were working on. So try to think of where people go anyway and go there with your message, with your survey, with your please get out and vote kind of thing. Don't expect them to come to you because they don't. People are really busy these days. It's harder than ever to get people to come to something like this. So don't plan something like this. You guys are the exception. The rest of them are the rule. Now that isn't to say that the usual suspects aren't important too. I think, that it's important to get the bankers involved if you can. Speaking from my own experience in Vermont, it's a very hard thing to do. But there are other states, especially Michigan, where I've noticed that there is already a really important schism between the biggest banks and the community banks. banks. You can get community bankers on your side if that schism exists, but you can't create it. You know, we try to do that in Vermont anyway by trying to educate our local community banks, but unfortunately in Vermont, we don't have a state bank in the same way they do in North Dakota, even though we do a lot of lending at the state. The little banks really do depend on the big banks as their big money bank, like they do in North Dakota with the state bank. So imagine that you can create that rift or get the bankers on your side. Not so easy. The credit union guys, though, are very interested in what we're doing. And so recruiting some of them to the effort to testify in the legislature would be a good idea, or getting them involved in your stakeholder group. And I'd just like to pick on Frank for a minute. He's come up with a great idea for developing a shadow board of directors out of bankers that are retired or interested in this idea. Moving forward, that shadow board of directors to the mayor so that he could really understand that there'd be people who understood banking behind the idea. And they've been doing a lot of good work here in Pennsylvania, recruiting bankers to the table. It's not as easy to do as you might hope. Because there is this whole ideological construct that goes with the whole division. Youth. I think getting young people involved is honestly the silver bullet for this whole effort. Because people will listen to young people about crazy new ideas a whole lot easier than they're going to listen to you. And young people have a real stake in this. After all, if they want to go to college, if they want to ever buy a house, a car, start a business, they're in deep trouble right now. And so you could recruit a lot of young people, I think, to help with the effort. And these are just a few of the things I've done with youth in the past to help get them engaged. Youth bringing home materials from school to their parents is the best way, bar none, to educating the whole community about something that you're doing. Again, I wouldn't try to do that about money or banking, but I would try to do it about student debt and things that public banking could do to make college education easier and less expensive. That would be interesting to both the students and the parents. I know I gave a talk at the local high school just this spring about this. And, you know, their eyes were a little bit glazed over until I got to the question of taking out a loan to go to college. And they were juniors and seniors, and boy, they got real interested then. And we had a lively discussion about it. But again, getting youth involved, you should do some youth training. You make sure that they're trained with your stakeholder group in all of those skills. Don't make the mistake I did here in Newburgh, where they wanted me to have a separate youth training. That was a bad idea. It's really much better to have the youth involved in the same training as the adults. Because at first, I couldn't figure out what was going on. They were really hard to work with. And suddenly I discovered that they thought they were being punished by being sent to me for a couple of days. They thought it was a punishment. And once I got that's why they were being so hard to get involved, I took them on, walked them all over to city council chambers, sat them in the city council seats, and I said, you were selected for this training because people think you're going to be sitting in those seats someday. They see a leader in you, and this is what you need to be a good leader. That got their attention, and suddenly they were a lot more cooperative, but it still was really, really hard. A group of teenagers for 2 days on leadership skills. Have them in with the adults, because then they'll recognize that they're being seen as adults rather than being treated like students. So, but definitely give them training in leadership skills, in conflict resolution, in teamwork, and all of those skills that we all really need to make group efforts successful. I can't emphasize that enough. So the youth engagement when we were doing the 100-year plan for Calgary included this, and this would be a great idea for young people with bankers. Generation Gap, you know, you have a project where you get a bunch of young people to go meet with your local bankers and talk about all the perils of taking out college loans and how do those bankers feel about it and what kind of recommendations can they make to those students for how to make their life more livable. Maybe that would work. Maybe that would recruit some bankers at the same time. Holding events, another big part of making things happen. Not events always that you plan that other people have to come to, but going to events that are already planned. The woman in the middle here is Beth Pierce. She's our state treasurer, and we got her to appear at a bunch of Democratic committee meetings around the state, and I would go with her, and we'd have these sort of soft debates about public banking together. The other one, ooh, you see Ricky in the front there, that was our, Ricky Gardiner's here with me. She's on the board of the Public Banking Institute. This was the event that the League of Women Voters organized in the State House to debate public banking. So, standing room only crowd. Of course, publicity is another thing you really need to think about doing to get people engaged. Print media, TV media, radio media. Think of something that's going to get attention. Like this year in Vermont, to try and get people thinking about public banking in a new economy, we decided to name a mountain Prosperity Peak. And we all climbed the mountain at the beginning of this week to do it. Because we found that you can do that in Vermont. There's unnamed mountains, and all you have to do is submit a petition to the Department of Libraries to get the name attached to the feature. And so we did the petition, and they're going to have a hearing about it. Fortunately, I was hoping it was going to be this week, but they needed to do more research, so it's actually going to be right when the legislative session starts in January. So we'll be coming out with this new mountain named after the new economy as a legislature. So that'll be a great press event, right? And it'll get in the papers, and it'll make people aware of what we're trying to do. So think of quirky things even that get you in the papers. And you can't just send out press releases. That doesn't work, really. Except in the little press that will print anything because they need to fill the pages in between the ads. And we do have some of those in Vermont, but for the most part, you gotta think of something exciting, different, interesting to get people's attention in the press. Planning a public communication campaign is another thing that is important to do, in addition to thinking of events and quirky items to put in the press. If you're really trying to get to all of the people you need to reach with your message about the benefits of public banking, you need to develop some goals and identify who your target audiences are and figure out what channels they listen to. Like, I wouldn't try to get to our business community in Vermont through Twitter. They're not tweeting yet too much. Some of them are, but it's not the primary way. If I'm trying to get to the business community, I go and get on the agenda for Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, talk to their newsletter editors, submit stories to them, or to the Chamber of Commerce at the state, and figure out how you reach the people you're trying to reach with your message. Don't just assume that they read all the same news you do. They do Facebook, they do Twitter, they don't. And so you need to understand your audience before you're going to be able to reach them. And then create your message. Overthrow Wall Street might be a great message for the Occupy crowd, but it's not going to work for your business community necessarily, right? So you need to figure out the best way to reach them both with the message and with the method. Evaluate and select your methods, identify your needs and opportunities, like naming a mountain, for example, and then implement. I mean, that's a strategy for public communication that's going to help you reach the people that you want to reach. Now, obviously, communication, too, is a two-way street. It's not just getting your message to them, it's also listening to what they have to say to you. And figuring out structured and good ways to do that is going to make your effort all the more successful. Because if people feel like you're just talking to them, you're not really listening to what they need and what they want, it's probably not going to work. Then this is the last point I'd like to make, is that even though the Public Banking Institute has been working on this for a few years, and we've come up with some really good ideas, I think, for how to get this to happen, we're still learning. Every day we're still learning new things about banking, new things about the new regulations that are coming down the pike, the new people that might be pulled into our efforts because of some other new eventuality that just occurred, right? And so if you change your mindset from understanding that you're going to nice and neatly plan your way to a public bank to one where you're going to learn your way to a public bank and have that sense of openness and not needing necessarily to be an expert, but to be a good learner in your process. I think you're going to have a lot more success because we don't really know. I'm here to tell you, at the very end of the day, all the stuff we said before, great ideas. We still haven't set up a new public bank in this country since North Dakota or the Chickasaw Nation, where they had national sovereignty to help them do it. Sad but true. I tend to think that finding the existing lending institutions and trying to get them a banking license is a good way to go. But in other places, it might be good to build up a whole new institution that gets rid of some old corrupt ones and replaces it. It's all going to vary depending on the place. And you're going to need to learn your way into that project rather than knowing what you got to do to begin with and just moving forward with the plan. Because every plan like this always needs to be adjusted. And if you understand yourself as a learner, hold the creative tension. Don't imagine that you can solve all the problems right away, but be willing to explore a bunch of alternatives. And most of all, look at everybody you are dealing with a level of respect and humility. As a learner, everybody can teach you something. Even the street lady who walks up to you, who's been homeless for the last 5 years, can teach you something about what it's like to be on the end of the stick that is not succeeding in our economy. And so you've got to treat them all with deep respect and treat yourself with humility to make these kind of efforts work. That's the end of my prepared comments, but I have my email here. I'm always happy to come out and do training or help you with your strategy or help you recruit stakeholders or speak at an event or something that would help you do whatever your work is. That's what I'm here for, and I'm really grateful to be here. I love this work, and thank you very much.
Not have questions with you, and so I want to give people a chance to interact with you and your experience. So let's Carter, you want to grab the mic here? By the way, our thanks to Carter for being the live mic guy. Love you.
All right, well, I'll just
Here, let's hear you.
I'm curious about the timing issue in terms of your own stage of development as you're working on public bank in terms of doing the outreach and engagement.
So when do you do the outreach and engagement? At the beginning or at the end? Well, I did it at the beginning, at least to include the stakeholders, because I knew I needed help. And I knew that we needed a wide variety of people involved for it to succeed. So I actually had 2 other people that helped me with that process. One was a businessman and one was an academic. So I sort of represented government, Gregor represented the business, Gary represented the academic community, and we all sort of pulled people we knew into the process, the 3 of us. We sort of joked it was the 3 Gs, Gregor, Gary, and Gwen. And we had meetings every month. It was a lot, we filled this room. I mean, probably 20 to 30 people would show up once a month to talk about all the various ways we could intervene in the monetary system on a state level to improve the lives of people in Vermont. We didn't start with public banking as our focus, actually. My focus at that point was complementary currencies. Other people had been working on public banking in Vermont, and that seemed, as we met and talked and explored the various options, public banking turned out to be the low-hanging fruit that we all pursued. But we didn't start with that as necessarily a fait accompli. Now, on the very public outreach, like going beyond the stakeholders to the public, we did as we had a political agenda. So last year, after 3 years in the legislature, not getting very far because of the banking lobbyists there, and this is what got me in so much trouble, right? little did I know the name was one of them. He was a very sort of quiet one. He wasn't the one that was always in the room with us, but he represented the bankers anyway. This other guy who was at the debate was the front man for all of the bankers. We decided to go to town meetings because the legislature wasn't moving because of the power of the lobbyists. So we thought, okay, we're going to take this question to town meeting. And in Vermont, our town meetings are a form of pure democracy that occur on the first Tuesday of every March every year, which conveniently is right around crossover day, which is the date that the bills will go from the House to the Senate and vice versa. So if you're trying to get legislation through in Vermont of one sort or another, like GMO legislation we passed last year, having the town meetings vote on it is a very effective way to get the message to the legislatures because it happens right at the same time as the most important part of the legislative session. So we went to the town meetings, we had them vote on it, 19 towns voted, it failed in a couple towns, or I guess maybe those banker lobbies lived, and they stood up. Well, one town, the advocate was sick and couldn't be there, and a couple towns, people were against it. But in the rest of the towns, everyone thought it was a great idea. And that was what we did, a big public outreach effort on. Because to get town meetings to vote on things, you have to. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks. Back there?
I believe my name's Dan Chris with Community Magic here in Philadelphia. And I really love this process because it's important. But what I'm not going to ask you a question. I would like to know what some of the people here felt they got out of this event before we all leave. So if we have some people that have something to tell us about what they got, I'd like to hear it.
I think that's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely, please, help yourself.
And now's the time to do it. This is the end of the day, so. You can either ask questions or say what you thought of the day.
Yeah, and,
Either way.
or share your own.
Or share your own experience.
Experience, so, yeah.
I'm from DC. I just think all of this stuff was useful, but especially the panel with Mr. Wu.
Yes.
And those folks, I'm definitely into cooperative businesses as a means for getting us to a survivable economy. The one thing that I think, and I also appreciated the fellow at the panel where the guy was from Reading, talking about the whole bond problem, and when bonds go south, and then privatization of assets and all that. I mean, those things, people, I think, if you're talking to folks about public banking, these are the kinds of issues that they need to understand. Really, we need to find a way to make it simple. But alternatives like worker-owned co-ops, heads up about the kinds of rules that get made in banking, which would make it more draconian than it is now, which would pave the way for privatization. These things we need to translate to people. We have to get people, I mean, we can't keep thinking that, oh, we know it and they don't have to, they do have to. So we got to find creative ways to help them understand what's going on. And the other thing I was going to say was that simply finding everyone I talked to, breaking down into small chunks what this really is about. It's really about having your money stay in your community and not going to Wall Street every night for hedge fund trades that make Wall Street a fortune. That's what's really happening. And also the idea that I haven't heard expressed much here that is big in my heart. I don't want to live in a society where everybody wants to be rich. The earth can't tolerate it. We cannot tolerate it. Consumption's got to go. We've got to make a stand, and if we're going to be surviving this planet, on this planet, and deal with the fact that that rich notion is a sickness. And at some point, we got to confront it head on, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. And when I was saying that as a money wonk, you are in a rarefied group, and that money and banking aren't going to be the first thing you talk to people about. I really just mean the first thing. You do want to make sure people understand the system. It's just not necessarily going to be the best entree with people that are new to the whole topic. The entree will be the things that they need, which is housing, and jobs, and money, and loans, and student education. Yeah?
Well, I'm really, what shall I say, very enriched by all that I heard today. I've learned so much, but I know one of the reasons I did come was to feel I was part of a community of people, not just up there in Boston. Our little group, which is unfortunately kind of little at the moment, and obviously we need to grow. And I want to say that I love the term solidarity economy. One of our advisory group members is the convener of the Boston Solidarity Economy Area Network. And I think what I feel now is we're all part of that solidarity economy, and solidarity is really a word that comes from the union movement. But I want to say I feel in solidarity with everybody here, and it's been great to have that experience.
Thank you. I am concerned about the exact crisis being communicated. And in my humble opinion, I don't think the implications of Dodd-Frank completely completely understood by the population. What is going on in Detroit? What is going on in Philadelphia? Do we really understand what's going on? Our court system will not fight for water for the people. We are in Philadelphia. I don't know what they're doing to the teachers, but what kind of impact is this going to be on the children? The system acts more and more irrationally as the system is breaking down. We are putting a tax on labor here in Philadelphia. The founder of independence. It just doesn't seem right. While we have a Wall Street system that is not taxed, we should have a transaction tax. Here in Philadelphia, we have a Philadelphia Stock Exchange, a NASDAQ facility. It's not taxed. It needs a transaction tax. Why are they taxing a cashier or a bus driver for their wages? It doesn't seem reasonable. And so anyway, as I said, with all these solutions being put forward, I just don't think that the public understands the exact state of the banking system.
No, I think you're absolutely right. The public does not understand the state of the banking system. And frankly, in my experience, they don't want to. They really don't. As sad as it is to all of us who really deeply care about these issues, they don't want to know. That's why I say start where they are. They're not starting in a place where they understand it. They're not even asking about it. They think the money in their pocket is a neutral means of exchange. They don't understand that it's built-in, privatized system that's driving the growth imperative, destroying the planet, and impoverishing humanity. That is not in their, nothing big. They don't understand it, they don't want to understand it. But they do understand that they want to educate their kids. They do understand that they haven't made their mortgage payments. They do understand that their kids can't find a job after college, even though they're saddled with all this debt. Start where they are. Start with what they need and their enlightened self-interest. That's the best way to proceed. Don't start with talking about Dodd-Frank and the Bank of International Settlements and all of these regulatory, they'll be out the room down the street past them. You can say, wait a minute, no, it's not going to work. But you're right, they don't know, and they need to know. But the way to get them to know is to first start where they are.
And I appreciate you starting from here.
That's it. Over here.
My head is just feeling like it's going to explode with all the interesting information. I listen to Tom Hartman every day that I can. He has conversations with great minds at the end of some of his shows. And I feel like we've had conversations with great minds. So I know when I go home tonight, I probably won't sleep that well because it's too full. But I also think Tom always says, tag your it, and I feel very it right now. And so I will go home, and my good friend is here with me. We will go home. We don't live in we live in a rural community. But the thing I ask people when I go to the grocery store, and I do this, I say to them, so what kind of banks do we have in America? And they kind of look at me like, you're not talking to me. And I say, okay, I'll give you a choice. 2 ideas, private or public. Some of them actually say public. And I say, I didn't know. So I kind of try to be funny, and so that sort of gets the conversation going from there. And I was talking to a young woman, I'll just tell you this really quickly. I was talking to a young woman who was at a store. My husband's tall, her fiance is tall, so we were in this very specialized tall store. And I asked her if she'd ever heard of public banking. She was young and she said no. So I told her a few things about public banking. And her fiance poked his head out and said, I'm very interested in what you have to say. So just a couple of people, I've decided I'm going to do one thing every day until I die. Yeah, public banking.
Great. That's very inspiring. That's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for coming and all the folks for organizing. About 3 weeks ago, Val and I, we went up to New York and we participated in the climate rally.
Yes.
And it was amazing. You know, we've been to other things. We've been to New York, we've been to DC. But the breadth of participants there was just amazing. Veterans, the Jews, the riverkeeper, you couldn't count them all. But I think that this is kind of like the microcosm. I see so many different people, so many different walks, and the people that were up in New York that day, there was a very high level of awareness. It wasn't like they had done this for the first time. They knew why they were there. They all could say what the problems were. Problems were the climate change, the fracking, all the problems. Nobody was talking about a solution. I think they're natural allies for this group. I think that if you want to reach out and do that first ring, that's a place to go.
Right, I agree. And in Vermont, we've done that. It's an interesting example because in Vermont, 350.org is very interested in divestment and they're very interested in stopping climate change. And the bank that the state puts its deposits in is the same bank that's building the Keystone Pipeline, FTD Bank. They're the second largest bank in Canada, Toronto Dominion Bank. And I've been working hard to get the 350.org folks involved, and it has been somewhat successful. But this is a great example of what I mean by starting where people are. Because even the people that I would hope would be the most tuned in to one way to get money out of a place they don't want it into a place they do want it, have been hard to get involved in the public banking thing because banking and money are just very difficult for most people to understand. They can understand climate change, but they can't always necessarily understand why banking and money is causing climate change. And I agree with you that we need to figure out simple ways to make that really clear. And that's what we're all here to do.
I'm sorry, I have to just ask this question now that you brought up with climate change and environmental issues. So I'm sorry, I'm Tina Angelo up in Maryland, and I'm very involved in all of the environmental issues and public banking. But one of the concerns I have is the Public Bank of North Dakota. Have they been involved in funding the fracking?
Absolutely.
And that's a problem that people will come back and hit us with. Well, here's your one public bank in the country, and it's involved in some of the worst environmental destruction. And I think we just need to have an answer.
I agree with you, and that's another issue that I think people need to be conscious of that is embedded in the question of what are we going to use these banks for? Money is fairly, money can go for good things or bad things. You know, and what I've been saying to people in Vermont is I've been using the North Dakota example and said, because we've already outlawed fracking in Vermont. I said, you know, we're not going to invest in the old fossil fuel economy with our bank, but we could invest in our energy future with our bank in much the same way they did in North Dakota. And look, they're producing a return for their citizens out of that investment. Let's use our public bank for solar and other renewable forms of energy, especially energy efficiency. Yeah, Mike?
It comes right back to the very first question.
Just a minute.
The first question, define your mission.
Define your
Once
mission.
you're back doing that sort of thing, make sure you're involved in defining the mission. The bank will do what you designed it to do.
I wanted to say the same thing, that I think it's really important to put the mission right in all of our outreach material, and that when the law is passed or the charter is created, it needs to be right in there, what it should be. I also wanted to be a little more optimistic about the climate because there was a whole very large contingent marching under the banner system change, not climate change. And the day before, we had a whole day of workshops about system change. And I did one on public banking along with somebody on local currency. And we talked about Bank Act also, which hasn't been talked about here. The postal banks for the unbanked as a response to the payday loans. So in any case, there was good conversation. There was a workshop also. I mean, there were lots of workshops going on. So I did one on the trade agreements. And we're here in Philadelphia, and I'll tell you, I went to one workshop where it was about local privatization. And a woman from Philadelphia said, after I said that we need to look at what systemically is causing the privatization, like the trade agreements, she said, you don't know, in Philadelphia our babies are being taken away, we have no time for this. And she came to the next workshop, and by the end of it, we were just hugging each other. So I think that there is really very active learning that is beginning to go on. There's a tremendous amount more that needs to happen. But I just wanted to say at least a door has been opened. And I think some of the climate marchers do get the systemic.
Alan, up here.
Ellen is...
Sorry, Ellen's back there.
I'm just curious to what extent the Bank of North Dakota funds the fracking. I mean, I understand, of course, they do roads and hotels and general infrastructure, but do they actually directly make loans to the oil business for fracking?
As I understand it, they do.
I haven't read it that they do.
Yeah. But I don't know the degree to which they do it. But I do know, this has been an argument we've had in Vermont, because Vermont will say, well, North Dakota is so successful because of the oil and gas industry there, not because of their public bank. And so I did look carefully at the breakdown of returns that the Bank of North Dakota has from the different sectors. And the business sector, the business loans and the student loans there actually are about even. And then there's agricultural loans and housing loans. So the two largest categories are business loans, and how many of those business loans are involved in the fracking, I don't know. But the business loans is about, I'd say about 28%. The student loans is again about 28%. Then housing is another sort of in that range, 20-some%, and then agriculture is another section. So it's not all because of the oil and gas industry by any stretch, and whatever percentage of the oil and gas industry is in the business loans would be the question to answer, but I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, Ellen, did you have a follow-up?
Well, I did try to look it up, and I haven't seen that Bank of North Dakota directly funds fracking. I think they just do general infrastructure, and of course that's good for it's better for the oil business to have good roads and so forth, but I think it's
You can go on the B&E website and see everything they did last year. Made 309 different loans in the North Dakota's economy last year, of all different sizes and shapes. It's on the website. No doubt, something along the line, they may have helped a pipe making company stand, maybe selling some pipe, I don't doubt that at all. But they've got everything from hardware stores to gourmet food businesses, to healthcare centers, to flour mills, to electronic medical records keeping, to. They've done throughout the economy of North Dakota. Inevitably, some of that money may be businesses making money off the fracking business. Well, that, you know, their job is to support the economy of North Dakota. It comes again down to mission. You can define the mission of any public bank you set up and decide where it's going to focus and not focus.
Right. That's an important thing to get the stakeholders to help you define. So it's not just one person's idea about what would be good for a public bank, but convene the stakeholders of the people that are needing the finance and figure out how to construct the mission that you hope for. That's what public banks, that's the beauty of public banking.
It's also, it's something to be very aware of that can get distorted in the process
Sure.
of bringing multiple people in. So.
Go ahead.
I think I would argue it the other way, that there are a number of states that have oil, but the reason that North Dakota has pulled out front is that they have a public bank that funds their infrastructure generally, which of course helps the oil business along with all their other businesses.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other states that have oil and gas industry where the state itself is not running in the black, like North Dakota is. Plenty of states with oil and gas the state is in the red while other businesses are flourishing, for sure.
This is just a very brief comment. Since we're talking about climate change and finance, you might want to, and bring it in the left, you might want to look at Naomi Klein's book on This Changes Everything. If you don't have time to read it, which I have either, then there's a very nice interview of her by Dave Roberts on risk, which summarizes things in about 7 minutes. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
This comment may not go over well, but if we recognize that public banks ultimately will have a mission that's defined by their constituents, and there are a number of public banks, and we have a diverse country, we need to recognize that some of those banks may do things and engage in loans or activities that we might not emotionally support, but they're doing what their constituents want.
Right.
And so we've got to, we've got to accept that.
Right? No, I agree. That's what I meant by multi-stakeholder processes being difficult, actually. You're not necessarily in the room with all like-minded people. You've got to still find a way to come up with a plan that everybody feels good enough about to move forward. Right?
Ray Torres. One thing the conference has made difficult is that the path for a public bank in Philadelphia is not real direct. It's basically, I think, from a study group, because it seems like there's different ways and to capitalize it, and a government financing institution might be one way, like but any help we can get in figuring out what is the wisest courses, I think I still feel I need a lot of help in discerning how Philadelphia should proceed.
Right. I think that is true of any city that's trying to proceed, so don't feel as if you're behind. But what they've decided to do in Santa Fe, just to give you an example, where we have a mayor who's really enthusiastic about it, is the city itself is issuing requests for proposals, requests for qualifications to get some consultants to help them with it. And so that might be something to do in your local community, is to raise some funds to get a feasibility study, economic impact study done. It doesn't have to be really expensive, so that you have some consulting assistance with it. Because banking is difficult. And to have people that are very familiar with the industry and with the regulatory systems and with all the rules around bonding and capitalization and pension funds help you think it through is really useful. I would just advise that it would be good as you do that to gather a larger group of stakeholders together to participate with you in that process, because then you'll have a broader base of support as you get to the conclusion of that process with your recommended directions. Back here, and then over here.
John Hemmington from Pittsburgh. Follow up what Jeff said, and I may get run out of the room for saying this, but I think we're missing a huge factor in what we can do to help move this forward. And I think because this has been largely a progressively oriented group, I think we really need to figure out how to talk to the mainstream Tea Party people, because they actually share many of the concerns in a very real way that we've expressed here today. And one of the great failings, I believe, in most of what's gone on in progressive politics has been an unwillingness to talk to Tea Party people because they consider them dumb.
I'm Tea Party, you all talk to me.
Frankly, these people are more astute than most of us realize, and I've made a point to try and talk with them about this. And if you can get over the cultural issues and not talk about it, you'd be surprised where you find agreement.
You're absolutely right. And even though here in Philadelphia, you may not yet have a lot of Tea Party people involved, on a national level we do. There's people who are convening public banking meetings in several states that come from that place, absolutely. And they're just as interested in the same things as all of us are. Human needs don't stick to party lines. Everybody wants their children to have a good education. Everybody wants to have a good job and a decent house and good health care. I've worked in countries where you have everything from extreme communists to, really right-wing people, that if you get them together and look at the long term and ask them what they want for their grandchildren and what needs they have that aren't being met, you get to a really good place of agreement as a starting point. We'll get to you in just a sec. The guy up here has a comment.
Yeah, I think this meeting has been wonderful because it's opened a lot of, at least for me, it's opened a lot in terms of we really have to be creative in how we go about things and expect the unexpected. I mean, both from the beginning talk on local economy and the strange coalitions that can come out working through cities or groups of cities, and then to have people from Reading and where they're working in a group of cities, and other people talk about alternative financing arrangements that sound incredibly creative. I mean, they're not quite invented yet, almost. And I think that's wonderful. And it reminds me of, I sometimes think that in Boston we've been floundering because we've been meeting with a group that is a new economy group that keeps talking about alternative financing and whatnot, but there have been some very creative ideas coming out of that. And someone from the New England Cooperative Fund who, in a way, is an ally, but also a competitor because they are evolving loan fund to make loans the way a community bank could or to the same sources. And she said, you know what's missing? We can't afford to do it. All the people that work as independent consultants and low-income people have no pensions. Do you think a public bank could somehow use some of its funds and investment knowledge to create a pension fund for these people? Wow, then you would have supporters like crazy from all your independent consultants and from people that need support to stay in the urban communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it'll come from unknown places probably for all of us.
Yeah, you're right. You got to be creative and you think about learning your way forward.
Yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
I'm learning my way backwards.
There you go. I was impressed with your presentation. I was impressed with your training presentation there, where you formed groups of people trying to develop their own organizational skills. I'm trying to figure out who outside this room would benefit from that. Have you ever worked with civic associations? Now, in my community, there's a civic association that's the same 10 people, but these are people who have an influence on local elected officials who are usually elected for life. But my point here is they might appreciate something like this. Do you have any experience? There seems to be two constituencies, people that are civically active and those who aren't. And you reach them with a different strategy. I suspect that some civic associations would welcome training programs like that. Broken down so that there might be one training session, not a series of 4 or 5, as it was apparent there. I think the other constituency responds to totally different influences. For instance, here, look at the NRA. Government's going to take their guns. That inspires people to write checks to the NRA. You can do either for climate change or something else. But I think the people who will ultimately make the things happen are people like this, people in civic associations, parent-teacher organizations, they'll ultimately make stuff happen. But when you're talking to that other constituency, the banks are going to fail, your money will be gone, that works for them. I would put more emphasis on organizational development. And if that training program is available, there are civic associations. In Philadelphia, I'll give you a concrete example. There's a public education advocacy group that puts out a really nice newsletter. They probably are staffed by 24 people, and those 24 people really have a significant impact. Thank you.
All right, well, I've done the training, everything from a half-a-day session to a 4-day session, depending on the venue and who is organizing it. Then I just have a couple of things, and another way to do it is to build a little training module into each of your stakeholder meetings at the beginning of the meeting. You know, have an hour's or half an hour worth of something that will help everybody understand how to be together better. And that's really the goal of the training session, is to have a high-functioning team by the end out of a very diverse group of people that don't even speak the same language when you start. But the way you recruit them isn't necessarily for me to go to them and talk to them. The way we recruited them, especially in Newburgh, where we had huge problems. I mean, anybody here been to the city of Newburgh? Okay. Huge problems. And we had the core team then recruit people they knew. And then the people that they recruit people they knew. So just think for a minute. If some friend of yours says to you, gosh, I'm going to this session in the city, we're going to learn some really new things, and the city's decided to change direction, and we're going to learn how to do that. You'd be attracted to that if it was a friend of yours asking you, and not somebody you didn't know, right? So the idea is to get somebody who is familiar with the person you're trying to recruit to ask them to do it, rather than having a generalized recruitment or something that may not work, or may only attract the people that are always attracted. That's the usual suspects, right? The people that always show up to civic meetings. You really want to get deeper into the community when you're recruiting your stakeholders and getting people that really are influential, but that aren't the ones who are always out there talking.
Gwen, I think one of the challenges.
Excuse me for a second.
He's got to turn on.
Go ahead.
One of the challenges is that obviously Gwen's a very skilled facilitator, and that's what she does professionally. And the skill set that you need, you look for is organizational development and skill set. We can identify people who can help do that, and that is very important. But one of the headwinds that we face in a big city, I love the Republic of Vermont, but it's a very different place, is that they actually have town meetings. When was the last time you went to a town meeting in Philadelphia? Well, we get a home and school association because the schools aren't open at night because they don't pay the janitors. You know, having in-person meetings is more and more of a challenge in today's world, right? And young people don't meet in person, they meet online. And us old people don't meet online, and we have a hard time meeting in person. So that's one of the, or at least our Philadelphia group, that's one of the caucus's challenges that we're going to be talking about, is how we can operate and get our constituencies. And
those facilitation skills are incredibly important when people have face-to-face and have to, manage their group.
Right, some of the examples I showed you were from the city of Calgary, which is another huge city, actually, over 1 million people. And they did an analysis of where people gather. They followed the idea of go to where people are, don't expect them to come to you. And they actually ended up engaging over 20,000 people in their public process, which to me, if you look at the percentages of the times you have to ask somebody to participate and when they actually do, 2% is the rule, right? If you do a mass mailing, you'll get 2% return. If you do this, you'll get 2% return. If 20,000 people in Calgary actually participated, that means that we probably reached everybody with at least the invitation. Through this process of identifying where people gather already, where the centers of the community were, who are those civic associations that might be interested in learning more, etc. But the neighbor they said the same thing to me. Oh yeah, Calgary isn't Vermont. And I said, well, it's still people. And you can still figure out what people do and how they convene and where they gather. And they did.
I think we need to call it, at that point, we're ready to wrap in the last couple of minutes. Thank you, Gwen. Yes, so thank you very much. Great. So much. I was just made me think about some of the resources available to you when you go home. On the PBI website, publicbankinginstitute.org, there's a whole host of educational materials. Some videos, some audios, a lot of it written. So please do visit that. And we'll also be launching a new educational template for course is called the New Economy Academy, which will help get you some more academic learning into the subject. I think this will be very, very valuable. That is what we have underway early next year. So, great. All right, so we're down to the last couple of minutes. I want to invite Mike Cross to come up and say a couple of words here. Take care of some business.
This is actually part of the day I was looking forward to, but it just came at the end. I want to do some thank yous of people who have stayed this effort and move along. Many of them are here in this room. I guess I'll start beginning. Stan Pocus is back there. And Stan, why don't you stand up? This is the Connie right now. Stand up and come back and go how many of you came along and did so much work to make this conference possible with a volunteer group, and I want to thank Connie so very much for that. I don't miss anybody. We have some people here who have been with this effort in Pennsylvania since the beginning, and I want to recognize them. I want to recognize our treasurer, Vanya Terrell. She was a campaign treasurer for a congressman. She knows how to keep things moving. It's precious. It's really vital. I want to thank John and Carolee Hennington sitting here, who have done so much in Western Pennsylvania. I got those friends. I stay at their house and out that way and don't spend any money for it. That's really important. So those are some of the folks. Jeff Beck is here, who's been not the guitarist, the banker, the guy with the guitar. He's a supporter of some Joan Bartle is sitting back there someplace. Joan's been everything. Joan's been on the side of the river. Rudy and Kathy Vizes back there have done our videos from the beginning. But this is what I've been looking for. Sure. There's one person in the room who I want to thank, and that's Ellen Brown. It is, in my opinion, the best sustained expository and persuasive writing American letters since the Federalist Papers. I've read those things. And I'm telling you, but this comment, gentlemen, it took 3 men Hamilton, Madison, Jay to get the Constitution off the grass. It took one woman to launch public banking. So we will take a small presentation. You'll see later a Liberty Bell on the top. This is that city. And it says, presented to Ellen H. Brown, J.D., in grateful recognition for vision and leadership of the American public banking movement by the Pennsylvania Project in the city of Philadelphia, October 18, 2014. And at the bottom it says, let freedom reign.
I waited all day to say that.
All right, well, would you care to make any remarks or if you have questions? Yes. Speech. Or at least a couple of remarks. Let me hold this for you. Doesn't look this good.
Well, thank you so much. I always feel like there's this sort of wind at my back, or, there's this great push from behind. It's this great support group that keeps me going. I'm always thinking, oh, I gotta start saying no, or I gotta quit writing those articles and write something else or whatever. But there's all this momentum and such a great support group. I love coming out and meeting all the people that are really, really into this subject. I mean, it's so gratifying. It just keeps me going. So thank you so much.
So this is it. We're down to the end, and I really want to thank you all for coming. It's been wonderful for you to be here and to have you here. I want to just say something. I was fortunate to do some traveling this summer and came across some of the Magna Carta. Just by happenstance, came across the Magna Carta. And I rushed in to see it. And, wow, that's important, isn't it? I mean, it's the foundation of all our laws, the whole idea that the plebes, those of us serfs, those people who haven't had any rights, been living under the domination of the oligarchy and the control of all the system, not having control, not having rights. This is where this thing happened. And I thought, wow, this is perfect because that's what public banking is doing. By the way, the reason I mention that is next June 15th, 2015, will be the 800th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta. Some things have changed. A lot of things haven't changed. But one thing is for sure. We are the people here who will see it through, that those rights remain ours. If we don't, they won't either. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for joining us for this presentation from the East Coast Public Banking Symposium, Public Banks for Public Works, Banking on the Commonwealth, held in Philadelphia's historic Friends Center Meeting House. For more information about public banking and the movement to create a national network of new public interest banks, visit the Pennsylvania Project at publicbankingpa.org. Or to learn about the national project and access a variety of educational information on the topic and developments in the field, visit the Public Banking Institute at publicbankinginstitute.org.